I promise you, in today's English lesson, all 50 of the English phrases and idioms I'm going to teach you are ones that I actually use in my English conversations. They'll help you upgrade your English to sound more like a native speaker or like myself. My name is Aria. I'm an American English teacher. Make sure you visit English Spoken Stories to learn more natural phrases, just like the ones in this video. Now let's get started with 50 English idioms. Buckle in. Has anyone ever told you to buckle in? Maybe you were inside of a car, but if someone tells you to buckle in and you're not in a car, they're not talking about your seatbelt. They're telling you to get prepared to do something that's very difficult or challenging. When I took biology in college at the beginning of the semester, my professor told me to buckle in, and I had to study so much for that class. It was so difficult. So he was telling me to prepare for a difficult semester of a course. When someone keeps just talking and talking, and you want them to get to the point, the main point that you need to know, you might want to say, cut to the chase. This idiom means get to the main point, stop rambling. But you've got to be careful with this idiom because it can be a little blunt and rude, especially if someone you know cares a lot about what they're talking about, but you just want them to get to the point. You just have to say, cut to the chase. Now, when you want to say that someone has thought of all the details of something and they haven't forgotten anything, you can say that they thought of the whole 9 yards. Now, this is a very strange phrase because in the United States we usually use measurements of 10, but I guess in this phrase we're saying the whole 9 yards. And pretty much all native speakers would know what we're talking about when you use this phrase. People in the United States go all out planning weddings sometimes, so they think of where they want to have the wedding, what it will look like, what food they'll serve, the guests, what desserts they'll have, the whole 9 yards. This just means they think of all the details. Speaking of weddings, they can really cost an arm and a leg. Now, this is a very old, classic idiom, but it's still very common to use today. If you say that something costs an arm and a leg, it means it's very, very expensive. A wedding can cost an arm and a leg. Now, I'm an English teacher, but if you ask me, do British people say this phrase a lot? I will tell you, you are barking up the wrong tree. The phrase, to bark up the wrong tree, means that you're pursuing the wrong thing. You have made a mistake in thinking that I would know what British people commonly say, but I've never been to the UK. I've only met a handful of British people in real life in the United States. Of course, I've seen many online, but I would not know what they say, so you're just barking up the wrong tree. So, when you make a mistake or inquire with the wrong person about something, you might be barking up the wrong tree. And of course, I think this idiom comes from the idea that dogs love to chase squirrels up trees, and if they're looking at the wrong tree and the squirrel's not there, they're barking up the wrong tree. They're trying the wrong thing. The most common idiom to say that someone is sick in English is to say that they are feeling under the weather, or you can simply just say, Aria is under the weather today. That means that she's sick, and yes, I'm talking about myself in the third person here. There are, of course, other idioms to say that someone is sick, but this is the main one that I want you to remember, and it's a very kind way to say that someone's sick without giving too many details. Typically, we only use this phrase if someone is just going to be sick for 1 or 2 days. They just have a small flu or a small cold. Now, if someone is very sick, maybe they have cancer or another disease, you would not use this idiom, under the weather. You would just say, they have a disease or they have an illness. If you want to say that something is very common and easy to come by, you can describe it as a dime a dozen. I think of this idiom when describing cards. People collect baseball cards, football cards, and Pokemon cards. There are all sorts of cards that people collect, and the idea when collecting these cards is you buy a pack, open it, and hope to get some rare card. But typically, you just get the common cards that are a dime a dozen. So, this is the idea that you could just buy a dozen of these cards for a dime, which is very inexpensive. So, if you want to say that something is just generally very common, very cheap, and very easy to find, you can say it's a dime a dozen. Now, this idiom is very commonly heard in the United States, especially on television shows and in movies, but I don't personally say it a lot, so you should know what it is because you'll hear it frequently. The idiom is, cat got your tongue? If you want to question why someone is being silent, or maybe you think that they don't have a response because they're feeling sort of guilty, you can say, cat got your tongue. This is a very sassy way of saying, why aren't you speaking? Do you feel guilty? Do you feel bad? So, I think this is why you'll hear this on a lot of television shows and movies because people are being very dramatic in these situations. If you need to say that there have to be two people involved to either solve a problem or cause a problem, you can say, it takes two to tango. The tango, of course, is a very popular dance that takes two people to do, and we use this idiom to say it takes two people to do something. So, I have 2 children, and if they are doing something and they're kind of getting in trouble, maybe one says, it wasn't me. I'll say, it takes two to tango. This means that it takes two of you to get in trouble together. You are both guilty. You could also say this to someone if you need their help, if you need the assistance of another person. You can say, well, it takes two to tango. Get over here and help me. It's kind of a funny phrase, and it's used definitely more casually. If you are very tough and you like working out and exercising in the gym, I think that you'll like this next idiom or very common phrase. The phrase is, no pain, no gain. Quite literally, when you're exercising, of course, you're going to be sore after exercising very hard. Maybe you lifted really heavy weights, and your muscles need a few days to recover. If you're sore and you have pain, you're probably going to gain a lot of muscle. Now, this idiom can also be used in situations where it just takes really hard work to do something. Like maybe you are taking a long time to finish a paper for school. You're working very hard. It's kind of unpleasant, but no pain, no gain. So that means if you don't work hard and make sacrifices, you're not going to have gains or successes. When you want to say that someone needs to confront a fear by doing something that they're scared of, you should tell them to take the bull by the horns. Now, this is the idea that, quite literally, if you're afraid of a bull, they have horns on their head. You could grab them and try to ride the bull, but this is obviously used very figuratively, very idiomatically. Let's say you're afraid of public speaking, but you sign up for a speech class. You are really taking the bull by the horns. You're facing your fears. This next phrase is so common, I use it all of the time. When you're talking about someone and they enter the room and you were not expecting them to come into the room and you want to say, I was just talking about you. It's more common to say, speak of the devil. Now, you might see this as kind of rude, but it's just so common here to say, speak of the devil. I think the full phrase is, speak of the devil, and they will appear. So, you're talking about this person, and they come into the room unexpectedly. You can use this phrase if you want to say that something is impossible to believe without actually seeing it for yourself. You can say the phrase, seeing is believing. I had a friend who had never been to New York City, and they said, I don't think it would be that great to ride the subway each day. I don't think it would work very well. I could say to them, well, seeing is believing. Once you see it, you'll believe it because the public transportation in New York City is much better than anywhere else in the United States. So, if you go see it for yourself, you'll understand what people are talking about. Instead of just telling someone to give up on something, you can say that they should just throw in the towel. In fighting, if the fighter is getting too weak and you can tell that they should not be fighting anymore, your team or your coach will throw a white towel. That means you give up or surrender, so this phrase comes from that idea. If you give up on something, you can say, well, I'm just going to throw in the towel. When I was a kid, I really hated playing basketball at first. My first few seasons, I was really terrible. I didn't find it fun, and I just said, I want to just throw in the towel. But my mom wouldn't let me quit in the middle of the season, so I couldn't just throw in the towel. I had to keep going, but I actually ended up really liking basketball, and I played basketball for many more years after that. So, I'm glad that she didn't just let me throw in the towel. If someone is being very stubborn and not changing their stance on something, or they won't change their idea very easily, then you can say that they really are putting their foot down about something. When my kids watch TV, I'll say, okay, after one episode, we're turning the TV off and I'm putting my foot down about that. That means I'm going to be very firm, very stubborn about it. There's no more asking, hey, can we watch one more episode? Because I think too much TV turns my children into, I don't know, just kind of crazy kids. So, I put my foot down about that. I'm very strict about it. In the United States, the Kansas City Chiefs just won the Super Bowl. Now, when a sports team here gets really good, they get really popular, and a lot of people start to become fans or they jump on the bandwagon. This just means that when something becomes popular, then you become a fan of it. Typically, when someone in the United States is a fan of a team only because they're doing well, we call them a bandwagon fan. That means they're not a true fan. They weren't a fan of the team when they were doing bad, only when they're doing good. You can use this idiom, jump on the bandwagon, when talking about other popular things, not just sports. If you're giving a presentation or a speech and something is happening in the crowd, but you just ignore it and keep going, you could say that you didn't miss a beat during your speech or during your presentation. We say this to someone when they just continue on without being distracted by something. Typically, We use this idiom to give a compliment, like, even though there was a distraction, you didn't miss a beat. You just kept going. One of my favorite ways to say that you're going to change your direction or you're going to change your approach to something when you're having a problem is to say, wow, you really flipped the script. Let's say you're a teacher and you have a student in your class that is failing the class. They're doing really terribly. Suddenly, they start studying. They start showing up to class and asking a lot of questions. You could say to that student, wow, you really flipped the script. Your grade is turning around and you're really trying now. So, this idiom, flip the script, means to just change your approach, change your direction, or even just change your attitude. When you talk to people who are engineers, they are very smart. They're very passionate about what they're doing. But sometimes, when you talk to them, they can really just get into the weeds on the topic. If you're not knowledgeable about their type of engineering, let's say they're a computer engineer, well, you're not going to know what they're talking about, and you're going to say, all right, you're getting a little bit into the weeds. This means they're talking about really small technical details that you don't need to know because you don't understand it. So, if you want to tell someone to just keep the conversation very general or, very understandable for you, you can say, hey, we don't need to get into the weeds here. If you are romantically interested in someone, we usually say that's your crush, and you're finally going to ask them out on a date or tell them that you like them. You could say you're finally going to make a move. This idiom is used for love and dating, but you can also just use it whenever you're going to finally do something. Take some big action on something that you've been waiting to do. You're finally going to make a move. Instead of telling someone to keep something in mind, which is also kind of an idiom, a lot of people will say, bear in mind. This is one of my husband's favorite phrases. He uses it all the time, so I have to teach it to you. If you want to tell someone a story, but you also need them to remember a detail for the story to make sense, you'll use this phrase. Let me show you. Yesterday, I took my kids outside to play in the snow. Bear in mind, it was freezing cold, so I didn't stay out there for very long. So instead of just telling you a story about playing with my kids outside in the snow, I need you to bear in mind, or remember, that it was very cold because it was pretty unpleasant to be outside, even though my kids did not care. They were having so much fun. When you first learned English, of course, you'll just learn basic sentences, basic verbs, basic nouns, basic greetings. But down the road, you'll need to know a ton of new idioms and advanced phrases. So, this phrase, down the road, means that later in the future. It's very common to say, hey, down the road, you'll need to do this. That means in the future, you'll need to do this. It's kind of like thinking about driving. Your future is down the road. Before we had iPhones, of course, we only had just regular phones, and some people just had a home phone. But once we had iPhones, it was a total game changer to our entire life. So this phrase, a game changer, is used to describe something that either really positively impacts things or it kind of throws a big challenge for things. It's some detail that either changes things for the good or for the bad. In the case of iPhones, you could argue that it was a positive game changer because now we can communicate so easily. But you could also say it's a negative game changer because people spend too much time on their smartphones. So use this phrase game changer. It's a really good one. One thing that I say to myself when I feel stressed out, when I feel, just kind of sad or angry, but I need to just focus on what I'm doing, is get it together. Get it together, Aria. This means just, calm yourself down, relax. You need to do some work. You need to get things done. So you need to be careful using this phrase with other people, because people can be very fragile in their emotions. And you need to, of course, be like, "Are you okay?" But when someone needs to just focus, get their work done, even though they're sad or stressed out, you could say, "Hey, you need to get it together." This means, figure out your emotions, try to calm down. If you want to say that something happened quicker than you expected or happened, very fast, you could say, "before you knew it," or "before you know it." So, I always thought it would take so long to become a teacher, but before you knew it, I had my own classroom, and I had my own students. And then, before I knew it, I was an online English teacher. So, life just moves really fast. It means that even though things can feel like a long time, the time passes quickly, and before you know it, you're old. It's really important when you're making a deal with someone, especially if the deal seems really good, to ask, "What's the catch?" Or you could say, "There has to be a catch." So in this case, when we say "there's a catch," it means there's something that's unexpected that will actually make the deal very difficult or very bad for you. And it's usually something that's very hidden. So sometimes in the United States, you'll see very good deals advertised for brand new cars, but the catch is that you're going to have to pay a lot of interest on your car payments, so the car is actually going to cost a lot more than you expect. There is always a catch when a deal seems too good. That means there's always something hidden that you will have to do that makes it challenging. My favorite idiom to say that two people or two things go along very well together is to say, "They're like two peas in a pod." This is typically used just for people. If you think that, your friends who are boyfriend and girlfriend just work very well together, they're good friends, they're good in their relationship, you could say, "You two are just like two peas in a pod." It's just a very cute phrase that means you go along together very well. One thing that's really common on American television is home remodeling. So they take somebody's house or a room in their house that's pretty ugly, pretty basic, and they actually transform it into a beautiful new room. Now, they show the new room to the person who owns the house, and the person always says, "Ah, I can't believe my eyes." Or, they're just saying, "I cannot believe it," because it's so great. Also, you could use this phrase if something was really bad. "Oh, I can't believe my eyes. How bad it is." If you want to say this phrase to someone else, you'll say, "Can you believe your eyes?" That means it's either really good or really bad. Of course, there's a lot of context to this phrase that's needed, but it's very common to say when something is, astonishing. You can't believe it. The next two phrases are very common to say when you have two difficult choices, and you don't even really want to choose between the two, but you have to choose. So the first phrase is to say, I'm between a rock and a hard place. And the second phrase is, I have to choose between two evils. These are both very common phrases to use when you have to make a choice, but you don't really want to choose either option. So maybe your mother and your girlfriend both want to spend time with you, and if you say no to your mom, you're going to disappoint your girlfriend. And if you say no to your girlfriend, you're going to disappoint your mom. So you could say, I'm between a rock and a hard place. Now, you wouldn't really say, I have to choose between two evils, because in this case, both choices are okay, but you're just going to disappoint someone. If you have two bad choices that you know are going to have bad implications for people, you could say, I have to choose between two evils. When you want to say that someone is telling a story but not giving you a lot of detail, you can say, wow, you're leaving a lot to the imagination here. This means you're not giving enough detail, and I'm just imagining a lot of crazy things. Now, if someone is giving you too much detail, you can either say, that's TMI, or too much information, or you could say, that's not leaving much to the imagination here. So, it just means that you're giving way too much personal information about the situation. A lot of times when people are telling really long stories, instead of saying, the ending, they'll just say, well, and the rest is history. This means that you can kind of guess what's going to happen in the story because you know it so well. For instance, in Cinderella, the prince and Cinderella get married, and the rest is history. That means they just went on to live happy lives. I'm not going to tell you the rest of their lives because that would be a long and just boring story. So you hear this at the end of stories or the end of movies in the United States. The rest is history. That means you can pretty much guess what happened. So in the United States, there was actually a show for a while about an Asian American family. They had immigrated to the United States, and the show was called Fresh Off the Boat. Now, I feel like this could be pretty insulting to say to someone like, oh, you're fresh off the boat. But I've heard people who have immigrated to the United States say this in a joking manner like, oh, I was fresh off the boat. This just means I had just come to the United States or wherever, and I hadn't acclimated yet. I hadn't gotten used to everything yet. I hadn't learned the language. Of course, this phrase is not so literal. People are not actually coming to the United States on boats very frequently anymore. Most people fly. But it's just kind of a funny, joking phrase that's used to say, I came here, and I was not used to everything yet. I was very fresh off the boat. If you want to tell someone that something is impossible and not worth doing, you can say, don't even bother. It just means that something is just going to be too challenging or not worth the effort. So, if you think that you need to learn every single word in the English language, don't even bother, because there's always going to be new words, and there are so many words that even native speakers don't know. So, don't even bother. When you have a to-do list for the day, you probably want to just finish it quick and knock it out. When you say that you knocked out a task, that means you just finished it quickly and got it done. So, usually in the morning, I knock out getting my bed made. I knock out unloading the dishwasher. I try to knock out the annoying things that I don't want to do later. Oftentimes in the United States, businesses will say, How did you hear about us? How did you hear to come to our store? Or how did you hear about our service? And, they'll say, did you hear about us on a commercial? Did you hear about us on social media? You could say, no, just word of mouth. This means that maybe you heard someone talking about them, or a friend told you about the store or the service. So the phrase word of mouth means you didn't hear it anywhere officially or written, just someone told you. This phrase can be kind of confusing when you hear it for the first time. When someone says, it's go time, it just means it's time to start. Let's get ready. Let's be motivated. It's go time. This phrase is especially used in movies, when at the end they have a big plan. Maybe they're going to do something or rescue someone, and everybody's ready. They'll say, okay, it's go time. Let's go. When you ask someone a question and you know they know the answer and you want to ask them a follow-up question, it's kind of like you're testing their knowledge. It might not be an official test. It might not be a teacher saying this. We say, oh, do you know this too? Bonus points if you can answer this question. Bonus points just means like, you don't have to know this, but it would be cool if you did. It's really a common thing to say. It's common in actual game shows and actual trivia competitions, but we also just say it in our normal, everyday conversations. Bonus points if you know where that was made. It's just kind of saying, this is a fun fact. It's not absolutely necessary to know. A funny phrase that I hear quite commonly is to say that someone had white knuckles. So, if someone is afraid, especially if they're on a roller coaster or in a fast car, they might be gripping onto their seat or gripping onto their chair, and they might be white knuckling. So we use this as a verb. It just means they're holding on very tight because they are afraid that they're going to fly off or crash in the car. One thing that I really take pride in my life is a clean house. I always try to have everything clean and tidy so that, it just doesn't feel cluttered or disorganized. But it's a lot of work cleaning your own house and keeping it clean. So sometimes I have to swallow my pride, and I have to ask for help around the house. I ask my kids to pick up after themselves. I ask my husband to help me with certain tasks. I feel like it's my pride, but, I have to ask for help because I can't do it all myself. And I feel like this phrase, swallow your pride, is very, very common. And you should also be very aware of what it means. When you're learning a language, sometimes you feel like, I don't want to ask what this means, but you have to swallow your pride and ask so that you can learn the phrase or learn the new word and understand what's being said. But it can be kind of embarrassing or hard to ask for help sometimes. But it's important just to swallow your pride. Say, it's okay if I don't know, and ask for help. When a situation is starting to become chaotic, you can say, it's going off the rails. Think of this as a train that, is about to just break. It goes off the rails. It's called derailing. But if you want to just talk about a situation in life that's starting to get chaotic or crazy, you could say, this is going off the rails. When someone asks you a question like, could I use your pen? In English, you can respond politely by saying, yes, or of course, or certainly. Or you can use this next idiom. You could say, by all means. This idiom is just used to give someone permission in a very polite way. By all means, yes, of course. So it's not, it's not necessary to always say this phrase, but it's just polite, and you'll hear it commonly to say, of course, yes, you can do it. You have permission. There are two types of people in this world, in my opinion. There are those who, when they travel, bring everything except for the kitchen sink, and there are those who travel light. So, these are both idioms, but the idiom that I'm going to teach you is to travel light. When someone travels light, it means they only bring essential things. They don't pack too many clothes, or they don't pack unnecessary things. So, people who travel light, they often only have one backpack to hold when they go on an airplane. But people who bring everything on a trip, they probably have a really big suitcase, a backpack, a purse, a lot of different things. So I personally try to travel light, but it isn't always easy. This next phrase is used pretty sarcastically in English, so if you want to tell someone that they're thinking too highly of another person, you can say, "It's like you worship the ground that they walk on." So you're saying, this person isn't that great. You're like worshiping. You're thinking they're like a god. And of course, this phrase is not literal. It's just an idiom. But it's used to say, you think highly of someone. Or if you're a big fan of, let's say, Lady Gaga, you could say, "I worship the ground that Lady Gaga walks on." And of course, this is a very dramatic way to use the phrase, but you get the idea. In the United States, there is an actual baseball Hall of Fame. It's a place you can go in Cooperstown, and you can go and see pictures of really great baseball players and all sorts of artifacts like baseball bats and baseballs. It's called the Hall of Fame. It's used to display the best players in the sport. So, this phrase is used in other situations besides literal halls of fame. It's used to say that something is really good or it's the best. Another phrase that's really great to use when you want to describe something that is excellent or it's the best is to say, "It's world class." So in the United States, Chicago is known as a world-class city. They have some of the best restaurants. They have some of the best museums, and they have some of the best sports teams. So, it's known as a world-class city. In a lot of different countries, you might say, "We have world-class whatever it is." A certain type of food, a certain type of dessert, or a certain type of university, whatever it may be. The last few idioms in this English lesson are kind of gambling, cards, or money related. The first one is to hit the jackpot. If you say that you hit the jackpot, it means that something very lucky happened to you. Something very big happened to you as well. If you married someone very good, you could say, "I really hit the jackpot with my wife or with my husband." If you want to say that someone is risking everything for something, you can say, "They bet the house." This phrase means you use all your money to bet on something because you're pretty sure it's going to happen. A similar phrase is to say, "I'm going to bank on it," and I use this phrase all the time. If you are going to go outside all day, you can say, "I am banking on it being very nice weather today." That means you're pretty sure it's not going to rain. It's not going to be cloudy. You're banking on nice weather. You're very sure it's going to happen, and you're relying on it. And if you want to say that something is going to probably happen, you could say, I think it's in the cards. Now, in the opposite way, you can say, this is not in the cards for today. So, if someone says, hey, do you think that we can go out to dinner tonight? You could say, I'm really tired. I just don't think it's in the cards for me today. That means it's probably not going to happen. I hope that it's in the cards for you to subscribe to my channel.